Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever your time zone is. Welcome to the show, Coffee Time Again. I'm Dale Hutchison. I am the host. Today we're exposing the truth, and that's what we do every time. What we're doing now is just a second, something went wrong here. I guess it's still recording. Something happened. I got something in my. Guess we're still going. You can still hear me?
I sure can.
All right, and we're okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'll have to edit that part out. But anyway, welcome to the show. It's coffee time again. One of my taglines is exposing the truth. And that's what we're going to do today. It's a subject that has not been talked about much, in my opinion. And I think it needs to be discussed because it's, in my opinion, what I know so far, sounds pretty right on. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Jack Kammer to you. I am going to expose the truth on men's abuse under Sexism Act, or however he wants to phrase it. We'll let him go and see what he has to say. Jack, you're on.
Okay, hi Dale. Thanks for having me on your show. Okay, so I get to introduce myself. So I'm going to make myself sound really, really wonderful. I'm not going to tell you anything I ever do that's not so great. So I am very interested in the social problems that we are all dealing with across this country and really in other countries around the world, any advanced industrial economy, that arise from what we think we know or what we want to say and believe about men and boys. Men and boys have problems just like women and girls. But if the narrative about men and boys is that men and boys are nothing but privileged, they have all of the advantages, and they don't need any help with anything, and it's only women and girls who have problems, then the problems that men and boys inevitably face because they're human beings are going to be ignored, and problems that get ignored typically get worse and worse. So the idea that men have all the power and women have none, and boys have all of the advantages and women and girls have none, I think is perhaps the biggest falsehood at work in our societies around the world today. And we need to sort of peel it back and discover what might really be going on for men and boys, and at the same time talk about what really might be going on with women and girls. So my belief is that feminism was half right. And anybody who doesn't believe that, who doesn't understand that, is 100% wrong. Because we know that what you see is often based largely on where you stand. And women have never stood in men's shoes. And so what they see about the lives of men is only at best half of what you and I know to be the real lives that real men face. Feminism wants to talk about the Fortune 500 and all of the male CEOs at the top of the Fortune 500. What they don't want to talk about is the many, 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 many more men at the bottom in the misfortune 5 million. There are lots more men who are relatively powerless and struggling in jail, for instance, committing suicide, for instance, being alone, not being able to see their kids, being alcoholic, doing drugs, being basically unhappy and miserable. Lots more powerless men than there are powerful men. Whereas on the women's side of the equation, there aren't as many really powerful women, but there are many more women who are doing pretty well in emotional terms. They are able to prioritize, and the society prioritizes supporting them in their human relationships, in the health of their emotions, in being able to express their needs, in having their needs attended to. Whereas for men, it almost seems as if the very fact that a man might need help disqualifies him from deserving it. Because, so the story goes, real men can take care of their own problems and they don't need any help from anybody, which is, of course, a fiction, a very ugly, cruel fiction that is driving many men into places they would rather not be. That's basically it. Now, I will acknowledge that in the old days, before feminism got started, we're talking about in the early 1960s, when Betty Friedan wrote this book called The Feminine Mystique, she exposed some pretty significant problems that deserved to be treated and taken care of for women. Because women were largely confined and discouraged from entering some pretty nice realms of life that were primarily assigned to men, namely big jobs, making money, having positions in government, having careers. And women rightfully wanted a share of that. What we have not heard from feminism, as a matter of fact, we've heard the opposite, is that there was anything that was good in women's lives that men didn't have enough of. And although we live in a materialistic society, and we think that having a big job and making a lot of money is automatically and instantly going to make you a happy man, you and I know that's not the truth. And you and I know, because we're not kids anymore, we know that, and we are learning every day more and more, that the most important things for a happy life are relationships with other people. When men are sent to corporations and to law firms and to competition in the business world for making sales and making money, we're not prioritizing our relationships. We even have to sort of ignore our relationships and just sort of suck it up and try to be as tough and as aggressive as you can be. So when feminism started talking about providing better opportunities for women to achieve their full happiness by talking about the ways in which women were restricted and confined by virtue of being female, and the solution was not to be sexist and to let people be who they want to be and have full opportunities regardless of their sex, a lot of men were saying, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. I would like to work less, they would say. And I would like to have relationships, better relationships with my kids. I'd like to spend more time with my kids. What happened in the early to middle to late 60s was that feminism was trying to get women to join its ranks. And women were certainly happy to get what feminism was offering. But more and more, they started realizing that this idea of equality between the sexes might not always be in women's favor, because to a large degree, women were the ones who had primary control over the relationship spheres of life. You know, they were the primary caretakers of kids. They were the ones who had the primary relationships with kids. They were the ones that the kids would run to when the kids skinned their knee. Men wanted some of that too. And when men started talking about having equality in life with equal access to the good things that women had, you know, a lot of women said, whoa, 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 wait a second here. I'm the mother. And yeah, you're okay as a man, but you're not a mother. You're not a woman. You're not so kind and gentle like we are, which, you know, amounts to sexism. And now my mission is to point out that just as women were confined away from some very good things that were traditionally considered male, men still today are strongly restricted from some very good things that are primarily for women today. And when men don't have the relationships they need and the emotional support that they need and the friendships that they need and the love and respect and emotional expressiveness that they need, bad things happen. And in a nutshell, that's why we see so many more men in jail than women, so many more men committing suicide than women, so many more men being alcoholic than women. And it's, you know, it's not because men are inherently that way. It's because of the roles and positions to which we confine and restrict men. And that's what it's about for me. I became a social worker to try to address these problems. But I found that social work isn't really interested in talking about the problems of men and boys. It's primarily focused on the problems of women and girls, which is one of the benefits and privileges that women enjoy, that our social services systems, our whole social construct is primarily focused on making sure that women and girls are safe and happy. Not so much for men. Men are supposed to make it on their own, and if they can't, who needs them?
Mhm. I've seen evidence of that over the years where men came in second place, as you were, in social skills. I was not a social worker, I was a drug and alcohol counselor for about 24 years. And I could see the women were getting treated differently than the men by probation and judges. And to a larger extent, even me, I noticed myself. Now that you mention it, I can see it. I couldn't see it back then, of course.
And there's nothing wrong with taking care of women and girls. Nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is that we don't take care of men and boys nearly as well.
Right.
And we're much more callous to the problems of men and boys than we are to the ways in which we have compassion and good compassion and care and concern for women and girls. And, you know, there's a boy crisis going on. Nobody really has a solid handle on all of the factors that are causing boys to sort of not be thriving as well as girls are. And you see that in lots of ways. You know, the quintessential image of a boy failing in being a happy person is that he's living at home with his parents and he's in the basement all day playing video games.
Yeah.
Whereas the quintessential image of the young woman these days is that she's out at school and studying hard and getting good grades, and she's got a plan for her career. So, you know, we need to wonder what is going on with boys today. And to me, although I know there are myriad factors at work, some experts say, well, it's the toxic chemicals in the environment. Other people say it's social media. And other people say it's because of the lack of fathers in their lives. All of which I think are partially true. But the fundamental problem I see going on with boys is that they go to a school, figuratively speaking here. They go to a school where there are two teams. There's a basketball team and a football team. And the basketball team gets a pep rally before every game.
Mm-hmm.
And the football team gets nothing. Nobody roots for them. Nobody comes to their games. Nobody wants them to win. And to me, it's very clear that girls are on the basketball team. They get a pep rally every week before every big game. They're always being encouraged. You go, girl. You can do anything. And what do boys hear? Boy, don't go there. Don't dare speak up about how you're feeling. Don't talk about how you are feeling ignored and forgotten. Don't talk about how you feel that it's unfair the way girls get advantages and you're not getting the same advantages, because everybody knows that you as a man, as a boy, as a male, are privileged. And so what do you have to complain about? Stop whining. So,
Yeah.
and so if you're a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boy and you hear that, how are you going to react?
Yeah.
Not well, not well.
You're absolutely correct. I remember it well. I was noticing the other day, in fact, just yesterday, part of it and part of it today, is that I was said to myself, "You're not being heard."
Who were you talking to?
Myself,
Who were you trying to communicate with?
everybody. I'm not being heard by anybody. They're not listening to me. It takes me it takes somebody, a woman, 5 minutes to explain what the situation is. It takes me 20. And I have to go over it and over because they're not hearing me.
And so what's the result for you? What does that do to you? How does that make you feel? How does it make you think about your future and your value as a human being?
It deteriorates all of them. It brings them all down. And what it really does is, there's a word I was going to use, uh, brings me to the point of what the heck is the use?
Or
Why?
would you say,
Why? Why spend all this time trying to get something done that you're not going to be heard and they're not going to listen, and so it's not going to get done? And some woman will pick up the idea and wham, it's done.
yeah, well, if it comes from a man, it can't be any good, Dale.
Yeah. Yeah, your second question here is interesting, but I want to get to the first question first. Why are male gender issues important to society as a whole? What difference does it make? I mean, I know the answer, girls. Here's yours.
Yeah, well, I sort of referred to it in the nutshell of, why are there so many more men in jail than women?
Mhm.
Why are so many more men hurting other people with guns? Why is it mostly men who are doing whatever they need to do to make money, even if it means poisoning their communities with selling drugs or robbing banks or knocking down old ladies and stealing their purses? Why is that something that it's mostly men doing? And I think as a society, we don't really think about it, but if anybody ever asked us, a lot of people would say, oh, well, it's because that's just the way men are. Men have testosterone, and so they're violent. And of course, the answer to that is that testosterone doesn't make you violent. It makes you aggressive, assertive. There was a time in America when we used to advertise our our available jobs by saying we're looking for an aggressive self-starter. Aggressiveness is a good thing,
Right.
but when aggressiveness is thwarted and frustrated, it often can become violence.
Yes.
So, why is it? So why are these things important? Because as a society, we're suffering lots of bad consequences for acting as if they're either not important or unchangeable. And it's just the way things always have been and always will be. And that's craziness.
Yeah, because they say that about a lot of things. That's just the way it is. We can't
Yeah.
change, which is
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
it takes a little time, a little work, but it can be done.
Yes. And look, let's recognize that 100 years ago, 75 years ago, much the same things were said about women. And women had to really be strong and fight, for the right to vote, for instance, to get into law school, to get into medical school. People said, oh, well, it's just not natural for a woman to be a lawyer. Women aren't supposed to argue and fight. They're supposed to be sweet and kind and caring and loving all the time, which is an example of too much of a good thing becoming a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, what happened to women 75 years ago is still happening to men today.
Yeah.
You may not do what you want to do because you're a male, and we know how males are.
Yeah.
It's sexism. The most sexist idea in the world is the idea that only one sex is ever harmed by sexism.
Yeah, I can see that. I remember back when I was 14 getting a job because I obviously lived in London and needed a job. And the town I grew up in was mining, predominantly mining. Well, I took a job as a cook, and the ribbing and the harassment and the teasing and the bullying I got because I was a cook and didn't go into the underground.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Let's try to figure out what was going on with those men who were giving you a hard time. I mean, it was mostly men, probably all men giving you a hard time because they were going underground and you weren't, right?
Well, men and the boys, my schoolmates, everybody.
Yeah. They were all going underground, even the kids?
Yeah, we had us 13 and working as miners
Ah, as young as 13.
back in the 50s and 60s when they could get away with it.
Wow. Wow. Well, so, we would never have let a girl go into a mine
Oh, we
because
did.
because for one thing, it's dangerous,
Mhm.
and it can cause health problems. But I would suspect that some of what's causing the men to give you a hard time was that, in a way, they were envious of you because you didn't have to go into the mine and risk your life and labor and sweat and break your back all day to make money. And if you were a real man, like quote unquote they were, you'd be down there being miserable too.
Yeah,
If it's bad enough for me, it's bad enough for you, Dale.
right. They would say, "Well, I make so much more money than you do." Well, I
And
want
what's,
to spend mine.
say that again?
Want to live to spend mine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there you go. That's the essential thing. What are men supposed to be doing? Making money
Yep.
by any means necessary. And apparently where you grew up, the primary means for making money was to go into a mine every day and work your butt off.
Yeah.
Whether you liked it or not, and you come home and you're tired and grumpy and you don't even have any energy left to develop a relationship with your kids. And
No.
the money, and there's never enough money.
No.
So it's just a grind and a struggle.
Mhm.
Where did you grow up? Kentucky or Pennsylvania or where?
Colorado.
Colorado.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Got it. Got it. So how did you protect your self-dignity from the ribbing that you got from these fellas?
violent, violence, fighting.
You had to fight a lot.
Yeah.
So there's another thing men are supposed to be good at, fighting, making
Oh,
money and fighting, huh?
little guy wasn't very good.
But at least you didn't let them push you around too much.
No, I didn't.
That's good. So they gave you a little respect,
Yeah,
but you had to fight for your respect.
yeah, I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of men have to fight for their respect, you know. It's in some of our worst neighborhoods today, you know, in the big cities.
Yeah,
It's a lot about respect. I mean, you know, young men are dying over issues of respect. And respect is in such short supply for them that any showing of disrespect can result in somebody getting killed.
yeah,
And that doesn't happen among the girls because, you know, they have a much better sense of self-respect. They don't have to prove that they're worthy. They just are because they're female,
right.
which is, you know, sad and a mistake and very destructive to a healthy society.
It's part of the problem, the fact that we put women on pedestals a lot.
I think so. You know, we you know, we talk about motherhood and apple pie, you know, and men get tattoos of mom on their arm. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with the fact that women have a, you know, personally, I think women have a nicer lot in life than men do. And so their job is to be nice and
Mhm.
sweet. A man's job is not to be nice and be sweet. Man's job is to kick butt, take names, bring home the bacon.
Mhm.
So, you know, if your job is to not worry about being nice, and a woman's job is to be nice, women are going to have a better reputation than men are.
Yeah,
They're going to be seen as nicer and sweeter and more loving and lovable than men are.
yep,
Yep. So yeah, so I think we have women on a pedestal, um, in a way. I don't know if a pedestal is really the right idea, but it's certainly a nicer neighborhood that
mhm,
they get to live in.
right.
And with if when men like me and other men who are questioning the roles that we've been assigned, when we start talking about wanting to be in women's neighborhood, what happens, I think, what is happening is called man bashing, male bashing, criticizing men for everything.
Yeah,
Men can do nothing right. They're scum. They're worthless. They can't multitask. They certainly can't take care of kids. They're violent. They're sex crazed. Uh, they're always sexually harassing us. We don't want them around. They're no good. To me, what's really going on there is very much like it was in the bad old days in the Deep South, when as long as Black people were staying on their side of the tracks, things were okay. Everybody knew their place. But when Black folks started saying, well, wait a second, we want some good jobs. We want to go into the good schools. And when that started happening in northern cities, like Boston as an example, we quickly learned that it wasn't just the Deep South that had very bad notions about Black people. There was a lot of racism that was exposed in Boston when Black folks said, hey, we want to go to better schools. Well, when Black folks in Boston started, you know, coming across to quote unquote the other side of the tracks, that's when racism really reared its ugly head in Boston. And I think that when men started saying, we want better relationships with our kids, we want closer ties to our kids, we want more work-life balance in our lives. When we started saying we want in our lives what women have always had in theirs, that's when sexism against men really started becoming vocally, unabashedly expressed.
Yeah.
You're no good. You're a sex fiend. You're scum. You're stupid. You don't have a clue. You're rude. You're aggressive. You're mean. You're violent.
You're a drunk.
You're a drunk. Yeah, all of that stuff. And, we got to get over it. And we got to say, well, no, that's pretty stupid and sexist.
Mhm.
And we're not putting up with that anymore. And we want access to the good things in life that you've always had, that we've had too little of. That's what needs to happen. But a problem for men is that we have this thing in our culture called honor. And so we are concerned about doing what's right and fair and just. And I'm not saying women are completely devoid of that, but their primary concern is the sisterhood and being liked and going along to get along. And so when women say they want something that is unjust to men, it's not so likely that other women will say, no, 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 we can't do that just because we want to do it. We have to be fair to men. They're much more likely to say, yeah, girl, let's get that. We have to fight back because we know how men are.
Mhm.
And so women vote as a block much more than men do. And so politicians pay attention to what women want. There's even the phrase, the women's vote, much more than they pay attention to the men's vote. Because the men, for one thing, are concerned with what's fair and just for everybody, more than women are. I'm not saying men are perfect angels. Men are concerned about fairness and justice, but we're also focused very heavily on making money. And so the primary thing we want to vote on is the economy, whereas women vote much more often on social issues and the ways in which they are taken care of. And so politicians have to pay attention to them much more than they have to pay attention to men.
I've been listening to you now for about 30 minutes, and I have not heard this from out of you. And so I'm going to ask the question. It's not about the question, it's about why ask it, because I don't hear it, I don't see it in you. And aren't you really just a misogynist? Aren't you? Why do
Yeah,
you?
well, that is one of the ways in which we men like me are forced back, excuse me, to our side of town. Get back to the other side of the tracks. You're a misogynist. You hate women. My view is that the biggest source, the biggest cause of misogyny is the overuse of the word misogyny. Because if a man like me, who deeply feels as he feels that there is something very wrong in the balance of benefits, the balance of power between men and women, if I can't say that because I'm afraid of being called a woman hater or a misogynist, then where do I go? I go back into my shell, and what do? I start really hating women.
Yeah, I was wondering why you even ask the question, because I haven't heard a word of that in any from you at all. In fact, I've been listening to you, and I'm getting the exact opposite.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, women know they have a lot of good things in their lives on their side of town.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot to be defensive about. And they know that the best defense is a strong offense, which is why they have such a very rich vocabulary of insults to throw at us. The chief of which is, you're a woman hater.
Yeah.
Women have a lot to defend. And unfortunately, although it happened among men 75 years ago, 100 years ago, when women wanted, into the economy and better jobs that we had, they wanted an equal share of the good jobs. When men were confronted with the demand for equality in our jobs, we had lots of lots of really bad stereotypes about them. Women cry too much. They can't make tough decisions. They just want to file their nails and eat bonbons. All of that stuff. We had tons of stereotypes about women, and women said, we're not putting up with that. You're a sexist pig, and you got to stop. Male chauvinism. But there's now a very strong strain of female chauvinism. Women think they're better than men in a lot of ways. And so they have this whole vocabulary of bad things that they throw at men to try to keep us on our side of town, to try to demoralize us and keep us from thinking that we have any right to the advantages and benefits that they have. And it's got to stop.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Here's another question I don't quite understand why you even ask it is, are you just fostering more derisiveness or identity politics?
All right, say that again.
Aren't you just fostering more divisiveness, more identity politics?
Yeah, yes. So these are questions that I suggested might be good to ask, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So identity politics, I think, is a very bad thing for our society. And it's causing us to be disunited big time.
Mhm.
And so, the idea that women vote as women and blacks vote as blacks and, Latinos vote as Latinos, to the extent that that's true, I think it's divisive. And so the suggestion that what I want men to do is to think of ourselves as men first, and we can only vote for what's good for men. I'm not advocating that. I am, however, advocating a little bit of that, because male culture and its idea of honor and trying to be good for other people, not just yourself, reminds me of being on an airliner flying somewhere. You've been on jets flying across the country?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you know that the flight attendants always tell you that if there's a problem and the cabin pressure decreases suddenly, you're going to have this mask fall down in front of you. And what do they tell you to do with that mask first, even if you're traveling with one of your kids? Do you remember what they tell you to do with it?
With a kid?
They tell you to put the mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
Why? Is it because the kid's not important? No, it's because the kid is important. And if you're going to help that kid through this emergency, you got to have a little bit of oxygen for yourself. You got to take care of yourself before you can help other people. And so I advocate identity politics for men only to the extent that everybody needs some level of care and concern for their well-being. And so we can't allow ourselves to be completely ignored in policy making and in deciding where we're going to spend our money. I mean, you know, there are 8 federal offices of women's health, or offices that are concerned with women's health, regardless of what their exact title is. There are no offices of men's health, even though men die 6+ years younger than women do.
Mhm.
You know, that's not a good thing for anybody. But it happens because women are demanding it, and men are sort of like, oh, well, you know, I'm a tough guy. I don't need any care and attention. I can get by on, you know, a Band-Aid. We need to do better than that. We need to be concerned with our needs more than we are, but not to the extent where some identity political groups are, where they're only thinking about their needs.
Okay. So I'm just, next, no, a lot of these questions I don't understand. The double whammy that black men have to deal with. What do you mean by that?
So I live in Baltimore. I live outside of Baltimore now, but I grew up in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I was, after I went to social work school, I got out and couldn't really find a job where anybody was interested in hiring a social worker who was concerned about men, because social work agencies they're concerned primarily about women and kids. But I became I wanted a job where I was going to be working around men, especially men in trouble. And so I became a jail guard in the infamous Baltimore City Detention Center for a year. After that, for a year, I was a parole and probation agent in central Baltimore. And it's very clear to me, as a man who grew up in Baltimore and looks around him, his social circumstances, and sees that it's primarily blacks who are in jail, not whites, that we know that there are problems with being black in Baltimore. There are lots of problems with being black in Baltimore. But when you look at the fact that black men are much more likely to be in jail than black women, we can reasonably conclude that it's not just because black men are black that they are more likely to be in jail than any other demographic. But there's also a gender component of the problem that's causing them to be out in the streets doing things we'd rather have them not be doing, that's causing them to get locked up and be thrown into jail.
Mhm.
So it's not just because black men are black that they're more likely to be in jail than other demographic groups. They're certainly more in jail than black women.
Yep. I did a podcast on that, and there was more black than Hispanics and Latinos and Asians, but not whites.
And it's primarily the males of those groups, not the females of those
Right.
groups.
All males.
So it's a double whammy. Black men, especially, that's the group I know, that's the marginalized group I know better than Latinos or any other marginalized male group. They're no good because they're black. We all know if we're racist. We all know how blacks are.
Yeah.
And if we're sexist, we all know how men are. And so black men are both. They're doubly no good.
Yeah.
And they're getting a double whammy, a 1-2 punch. You're no good because you're black. You're no good because you're male. And I think that says a lot right there.
That's pretty much says it all.
Yeah.
What was a precipitating event that spurred you into a radio show you first acted on male gender issues?
So I can go all the way back to when I was a kid. And I didn't even have any concept of sexism or male-female roles or anything like that. I was a kid. I was probably, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. And I was the kind of kid who loves babies. I loved being around babies. I loved playing with babies. I was really good with babies. I could make them laugh. I could keep them from crying. I could get them to stop crying. I was comfortable around babies. I thought they were so much fun. So just keep that in mind for a second. Now, imagine that later on today, you meet a young girl who's 8, 9, 10 years old, and she's really good at sports. Or she's 8, 9, 10 years old, and she's really good at math. Would you say to her, gee, Susie, you're really good at sports for a girl? Or would you say to her, gee, Susie, you're really good at math for a girl? You know, after 50 years, 60 years of feminism telling us that that's not a helpful thing to do, we would say, no, we don't want to say that to Susie. We don't want to make her feel like she's, you know, a weirdo and not a regular girl. What I used to hear when I was a kid was, gee, Jack, you're really good with babies for a boy. And what that message was to me, although I didn't really get it consciously at the time, but I knew something was up with that. I knew something was wrong with that. The message to me was, you know, boys don't do this. Boys don't try to find happiness taking care of kids, taking care of babies, taking care of other people, being concerned about people's feelings and how to make them happy and healthy. No, you're supposed to be out there, you know, kicking butt, playing war. So, you know, it wasn't until probably 40 years later that I realized that, no, that was a sexist thing for people to say to me. And they were basically telling me, this is not where you're going to find your happiness as a boy. Don't think much about being a primary parent to your kids. You know, the idea of a father staying home back then was unheard of. It's getting to be more common today. But even today, a father who has been a stay-at-home father is still very much at risk of losing his relationship with his kids if the wife decides she's going to divorce him. You know, it's still not anywhere near fair. So that was the earliest thing I can remember about being at least somewhat aware that there's something about being a boy that's not quite fair here. The second thing, much later, was that I was on a co-ed softball team. And we used to go out after our games on Tuesday nights. We'd go to, you know, a bar and drink and dance and have dinner. And 2 weeks in a row, I was sitting and talking to a female teammate, two separate female teammates, different one each week. We were both weeks. And the women were talking to me about their boyfriends and some problem they were having with their boyfriends. And both times they ended their stories about this horrible thing that their boyfriends were doing to them with this question. And so, Jack, he's a real jerk, don't you think? Both weeks. And both times I could only say, well, you know, maybe based on what you're telling me, your boyfriend is a real jerk. But, you know, on the other hand, maybe from his point of view as a man, maybe what he's thinking and feeling and experiencing is such and such. And I don't even remember what the incidents were, the stories were about. But I just said something that was perfectly obvious to me as a man. Just put that out on the table. And both times, the women said, oh my God, I never thought of that. And so it became very clear to me that the male perspective was just being completely disregarded. And there was no interest in trying to understand life from a male point of view. And I
Mhm.
said, well, I'm going to do a radio station. I'm going to do something about this. Originally, I was going to try to start a magazine, but my girlfriend at the time said, printing is expensive, postage is expensive. Maybe you don't want to do a magazine. Maybe you want to do a radio show. And of course, that was a much better idea. And that's what I did. I started a radio show. And every week I got to talk to people about what was really going on with men. Not that men have all the power. It ain't it great being a man. So that's the other major precipitating fact in why I got into this.
And yeah, I can see how it's talking to these two girls and setting exactly the same questions, the same answers, and they couldn't see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can definitely understand that. Because I had similar things, both men and women to a certain degree in my class, in my groups. Yeah, they were in there, especially the social services clients that I had went for child abuse or child neglect mostly, you know, and they would come up to me with that same thing. Well, he's a jerk. He doesn't, or she's a jerk, and sometimes that language wasn't so good. So I understand that very well.
Yeah. I mean, social workers, especially the child protective ones, that's a horrible job. Not a horrible job. I'm sure some people find it very fulfilling, but it's
Yeah.
a rough job. And their caseloads are terrible.
Yeah,
And so I can sort of understand what social workers are up against. But when a social worker has to remove a child from an abusive mother and they need to find a placement for this child, somebody who will love the child, social workers very rarely will even consider the father.
no,
Very rarely even consider the father. They'll even not as often as considering the mother's family will they consider the father's family. An aunt or a grandmother.
yeah, because of the perception of man being the aggressive, violent person that they are. Not.
Right. And they want to keep the mother as closely connected to the child as they can. And they can do that through the mother's family much better than they can through the father's
Yeah,
family.
yeah, I see that they rarely, and even in divorce cases, they rarely award the custody of the children to the dad.
Well, that's getting a little bit better, but it's also getting a lot worse in some ways
Yeah,
because we talked about how now that men are saying they want to come across the tracks into the nicer part of town and have better relationships with their kids and better work-life balance for themselves, the racism, the sexism in this case, is coming out, and the accusations against men are fast and furious. And so if a woman really wants to, in a way, lynch the father and have him strung up and removed from her having to deal with him, all she's got to do is to say something like, the kids are afraid of him. He was violent towards the kids. He was sexually abusive towards the kids, or he was physically violent to me, or
yeah.
even he was emotionally abusive to me.
Hmm.
What judge these days is going to risk not removing that man from any possibility, no matter how remote, that he's a bad guy who might hurt the woman or the kids?
But
You know,
that's how my ex-wife managed to get my three boys to Missouri.
what did she tell the judge?
I'm an alcoholic.
And how truth was that?
Very truthful.
Okay, so And so was that enough for the judge to say, therefore, Dale is no good and the kids don't need him?
That was enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Even
Now,
though
if you were,
my
if you
recovery
were,
at the time.
and if you were, you were not in recovery at the time?
Yeah, I was
You were. How was that going?
rough, but I was making it.
Okay. Now, if you were a woman who was an alcoholic, do you think that the woman could have been seen as somebody needing help? And that taking the kids away from her would be the last thing she needed?
Yes.
And
I've
how,
seen it
how,
I've seen it happen with some of my clients being, when they went to court to get their children back. Father was, there was nothing in the father's record that indicated to me that he had a problem of any kind. I'm sure there was some, I just didn't see it. But the mother had all kinds of promiscuity, uh, drinking, running around, cheating, and
drugs?
all of that, and she still got the kids.
Yeah. Did you say you were a social worker of some kind, Dale?
No, it's a drug and alcohol counselor.
Okay. Okay. Did you find that removing the kids from you and letting your wife take them to Missouri was helpful to your recovery?
No, it was not.
It was sort of a rhetorical question. It
Yeah.
probably just made it worse, didn't it?
It made it much worse because I didn't have my support system there. My
Yeah.
kids were part of my support system, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
1,000
Yeah.
miles away, and I get to see them at Christmas and in the summer.
How old are they now?
Now, the oldest one's going to be 50 in November.
50. Yeah. And they're still, you still think of them as your kids?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The son. I don't try to say Alan. I say my oldest son.
Okay. What else should we talk about?
Well, we're about out of time here, Jack. Yeah, we got about 2 minutes here, so we're gonna have to wrap it up. But I'll tell you what I'm gonna do, if you're willing. We'll come back and do this a second time
It sounds good to me.
in a few months, as soon as things. Cause I got like 3 people ahead of you who are gonna be doing 2 shows too.
Okay.
So it'll be about 6 months before I get back to you, but I will get back to you.
All right. I will look forward to that, Dale.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We just heard from Jack and the male sexism. Female sexism against the male, so we need to say thank you, Jack, and we will see you all later. As you may have heard, I just invited Jack to come back in about 6 months. We'll go pick up where we left off. Thank you very much, Jack. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Dale.
Bye.
Bye-bye.